welcome to our third video in the series of talking to kids about genetic kidney disease. In this section, we will be discussing working together with adolescent children about decision-making for genetic testing. Thank you for joining us, Ella. So my first question is, why should adolescent children be involved in decision-making when it comes to genetic testing in kidney disease?
It's a great question, and I think it's something that's actually absolutely critical, because any information about genetics relates to their own health, and we know that adolescence is a sort of push and pull time of no longer quite a child, but also not an adult, and adolescents can move back and forth in that space, and it will happen. That transition is a process that happens at different times and looks different for every single child or adolescent.
Mm-hmm.
But involving them plays a really important part in that process of demonstrating to them that you trust them and that they are competent to make these sorts of decisions that are important for themselves, because all of this is going to be important for them for the rest of their lives in terms of their own health. And adolescents are approaching a time where they need to take more responsibility for their own healthcare, but also thinking about if they want to have children of their own in the future, then this information can be important there. So involving them in thinking about all those aspects of having a genetic test is really important. And we also know that when adolescents, and really this applies more broadly too, but are involved in that decision making, it gives them a sense of competency and agency, and actually often helps with coping and adaptation if they've been part of the process from day one.
So what sort of recommendations would you make to families to how best to involve adolescent children in this decision-making process?
Well, I think that adolescents often have a preference for hearing this sort of information from someone they trust and have an existing relationship with, so often a family member rather than a healthcare professional to start with, which goes to this whole session on open communication with the family. So, it's often helpful if you're going to have a discussion with a healthcare professional, that there's been some pre-discussion at home first between the parent or another adult and the adolescent. And I think that discussion can cover all sorts of different things, but thinking about what are the different options here, and putting them all on the table, and then thinking about what are the pros and cons or the risks and benefits of each option. I think it's really important that that the adolescent is given a chance to think about what's important to them and how they feel about this decision. And I think really encouraging them to ask questions, mull it over, go back and forth a little bit. And I think all of that demonstrates respect to them. And that can be really empowering, as I said before.
Absolutely. And what would you advise for families who are trying to navigate differences of opinion between themselves as parents and their adolescent child or children?
I guess that's not something that is new or isolated to this context. I'm sure there's plenty of situations where a parent and an adolescent will have a difference of opinion about an important decision. But I think in relation to genetic testing, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the adolescent has a right to have an opinion, and that it's okay if it's different to their parents or other people in the family. And usually in this case, either decision is acceptable. There's not a right or a wrong. And there's also often no rush. So it is something that you can take time to work through. Why do you feel differently? What what is the parent putting weight on in the decision-making process, and what is the adolescent, and how is that similar or different? But I also think that if you feel really stuck, that kidney doctors and genetic counselling, genetic counsellors and genetics doctors can be someone who can be added into the conversation. So if you're feeling that you've reached the sticking point with your adolescent, that involving somebody else in the discussion to help weigh all those different factors and help with the decision making can be useful.
Absolutely. Ella, from your experience in these situations, what are the main concerns that adolescents voice when it comes to making decisions about genetic testing?
I think that often, and obviously this really depends on the age of the adolescent, but they often feel unsure. It feels like a very big decision, and because it is something that is discussed rather than deciding for them, I think that adds to the weight of the decision. And I think there can be so much tied up in what their experiences are of the kidney disease in the family, in terms of how worried they are about the outcome of the testing. And that will depend on what they've seen in their family. And I think, there's also aspects around not wanting to upset or worry their parents. And I think, if there's more than one child in the family or more than one adolescent, there can also be concerns around siblings. And, if more than one child or adolescent is considering testing at the same time, that can play into it in terms of, will we make the same decision and will our results be the same, and things like that.
Absolutely. That family dynamic is very important. Yeah. Well, with that, I'd like to draw this session to a close. So thank you very much, Ella, for your time and your expertise and sharing them with us today. Thank you.
You're welcome.